eyesight magically improved overnight, unfortunately. But I got a new webcam over Christmas, and that has allowed me to start recording in 1080p. I'm not really sure if this is an improvement, because personally I would not want to see myself more clearly, but I figured I would try it out and see if it improves video quality. I do worry that my laptop is not going to be able to handle this increase in quality, and it might make the videos laggy. So just let me know how this video turns out on your end, and if it's too stuttery, then I'll probably just drop back down to 720p. But let's jump right into the nitty-gritty. So first up, we had Thursday Night Football, which was a matchup between the New Orleans Saints and the Los Angeles Rams. The Rams would go on to win this game with a final score of 30-22, bringing them to a overall record of 8-7, while the Saints fall to 7-8. I watched this entire game because I had a lot of fantasy players in it, and lucky for me, a lot of the players that I had did well. That would be Matthew Stafford, Kyren Williams, Buccaneers, and Cooper Kupp had an alright day. He didn't do amazing. The Rams honestly were running away with this in the beginning, and then in the fourth quarter the Saints managed to catch up a bit, but it wasn't enough, as they still fell 8 points short. But let's break down how people did in this game. First up, for passing, in the quarterback head-to-head matchup, you had Derek Carr completing 27 passes for 319 yards, 3 touchdowns, and 1 interception, which on paper looks like a pretty solid day. Across from him, you had Matthew Stafford, who had completed 24 passes for 328 yards and 2 touchdowns, playing pretty well, I might say. One interesting thing to note is that the Saints really did not do well when it came to red zone, like getting to the red zone. Their first score was, I think, like a giant bomb to Rashid Shaheed. Is that his name? What is that guy's name? Yeah, Rashid Shaheed. He caught this monster pass from Derek Carr to make the game a little bit more competitive. And though Carr was wheeling and dealing to Chris Olave for most of the game, they weren't doing well in the red zone. They never got particularly close. I feel like all of their end zone passes, except for the last one, came from kind of far out. But yeah, moving into running backs, you had Alvin Kamara rushing 9 times for only 19 yards, so the Saints had a horrible time running the ball. And on the other hand, the Rams did quite well. You had Kyren Williams getting 22 carries for 104 yards and a touchdown. And then, as I mentioned before, Chris Olave had a very nice day, hauling in 9 passes for 123 yards, but he did not do quite as well as the rookie superstar Buccaneers, who brought in 9 passes for 164 yards and a touchdown grab. Another monster game from him. It looks like Bucca might be on track to beat Jamar Chase's rookie receiving yard record from just a couple years ago. So we'll see in the next 2 weeks if he is able to break that record, which would be very impressive. Then moving into the team stats for this game, you will find that it's loading. In total yardage, the Saints were well short of the Rams by a little over 100 yards. It was 339 to 458. When it came to passing the ball, Derek Carr's 304 yards were... What? These numbers don't match up. I never understand. I feel like when you look at the passing yards, it doesn't match how many yards the quarterback actually had. But we'll just go with what it says. The 304 yards from Derek Carr biggest difference in this game was rushing the ball. The Saints finished with only 35 rushing yards, whereas the Rams finished with 133, so almost 100 yards of difference on the ground game, and that obviously leads to a huge disparity when it comes to time of possession, with the Saints holding the ball for 25 minutes and 42 seconds, whereas the Rams held the ball for 34 minutes and 18 seconds. And then taking a look at the turnover battle, it was a 1-0 battle, relatively little turnovers in this game, just the one interception from Derek Carr. And looking at the sacks in this game, where does ESPN tell me the sacks? 2. Okay, so Saints suffered 2 sacks to the one of the Rams. So, when it comes to turnovers and sacks, the Saints didn't do that much worse, but they could not get the ground game going at all, and that really cost them in this game. They were able to find their groove in the fourth quarter, but it was a little too late for that. So, with this loss, the Saints find themselves behind in the NFC South playoff race. They would have been just fine if they had won, but now their playoff chances are quite slim. And on the other hand, the Rams are in a pretty good position having won this game. So this was a crucial matchup for both teams, and the Rams got the better of the Saints. Then moving into the Saturday slate, you had first up the Cincinnati Bengals going to Pittsburgh to face off against the Steelers. I did not expect this outcome, but the Steelers absolutely destroyed the Bengals in this game, winning with a final margin of 34-11. Oddly enough, it was Mason Rudolph leading the charge for the Steelers in this game. He was starting in place of Mitch Trubisky, who was starting in place of Kenny Pickett, so this is their third string quarterback, but he was playing like a first stringer. Just an amazing game from him. He completed 17 passes for 290 yards and 2 touchdowns. And on the opposing side of the field, you had Jake Browning, who really struggled in the first half, especially against the Steelers defense. He completed 28 passes for 335 yards and 1 touchdown, but that also was accompanied by 3 interceptions, which were detrimental to the Bengals' efforts to get to the playoffs. Then, taking a look at the rush yards, you'll see that Joe Mixon had 11 carries for 43 yards, which is not the best, a little under 4 yards per carry. And across from him, you had Najee Harris, who had 19 carries for 78 yards and a touchdown. So, just a more productive day for a Steelers running back. And then, receiving the ball, you had 2 very good wide receiver days. One with T. Higgins, who caught 5 passes for 140 yards and 1 touchdown, which is pretty nice, until you look at George Pickens' stat line, which was 4 catches for 195 yards and 2 touchdowns. My guy almost had 50 yards per catch. Absolutely crazy yardage for George Pickens in this game. If you had him in fantasy, props to you. I would not have known to play him, especially with the third string quarterback at the helm, but he really delivered when it mattered most. Then transitioning into team statistics, you'll find that this game was pretty even in total yardage. The Bengals finished with 368 yards to 397 of the Pittsburgh Steelers, and the breakup of that was 309 yards passing for the Bengals to 284 for the Steelers. But on the ground, the Bengals rushed the ball for a total of 59 yards, and the Steelers rushed for a total of 113. So there's a difference of about 54 yards there, and that is somewhat significant. Another key statistic for this game is red zone efficiency. The Bengals made it to the red zone 3 times, and they walked away with a score in 0 of those trips, whereas the Steelers were 2-3 in their red zone efforts. And then, obviously, in the turnover battle, lost by a big margin to the Bengals. They had 3 turnovers to the 0 of the Steelers, and when it comes to sacks, the Bengals also suffered more. They had 3 sacks to the 1 of the Steelers. So even though the Steelers held the ball for less time in this game, the Bengals just kept losing it. They kept giving it away. So it's honestly impressive that they held the ball for more time than the Steelers. But yeah, lack of red zone efficiency and turnovers lost them this game. The Jake Browning Linsanity run might be over, and both teams sit at a record of 8-7. I have to give credit where credit is due. Mike Tomlin, when his streak of staying at 500 is on the line, just absolutely brilliant. I don't know how he cooked up this victory, but I should have known better than to doubt him. He brings the Steelers to a positive record with 2 weeks left in the season, so we'll see how that plays out for them. But very impressive stuff from Mike Tomlin and the Steelers team. After that, we move into the second game in the Saturday slate, which was the Bills at the Chargers. The Bills would end up winning this game with a final score of 24-22. The game was very close, with 2.5 minutes left. Josh Allen spliced the Chargers defense for a game-winning drive. They were losing 21-22, and he led them to a nice field goal to take the lead. And yeah, taking a look at their stats, Josh Allen completed 15 passes for 237 yards and 1 touchdown. That was also accompanied by 1 interception. Across from him on the Chargers side, you had Easton Stick, who completed 23 passes for 215 yards and no touchdowns or interceptions. Then rushing the ball, you had James Cook rushing 20 times for 70 yards, not the most efficient. And across from him, there was Austin Eckler rushing 15 times for 65 yards, which is pretty good for Austin Eckler. He's not necessarily known for his rushing abilities. And then receiving, you had 2 wide receivers. This was one of those Gabe Davis miracle games where he manages to play amazing. He got 4 passes for 130 yards and 8 touchdowns. And for the Chargers receiving corps, I believe they were playing without Keenan Allen yet again. Let me double check on that. No Keenan Allen in this game for the Chargers, so playing down one of their best players, 2 of their best players when you include Justin Herbert. So you had Josh Palmer leading the receiving group with 5 catches for 47 yards. So when it comes to total offense, the Chiefs outgained the Chargers by 62 yards with a total of 335 to 273. Extraordinarily enough, the Bills actually lost the turnover battle very, very badly, at a margin of 3-0. They turned the ball over by fumbling twice and throwing a pick once, but they were able to overcome those mistakes and still get the victory. Part of that is due to the huge difference in the sack difference. The Bills only suffered 1 sack, whereas the Chargers allowed Easton Stick to get sacked 5 times. And taking a look at the passing yards, you had the Bills completing 230 yards of passing to 175 of the Chargers, and rushing it was about even, with the Bills rushing for 105 yards, whereas the Chargers rushed for 98. So, yeah, for the Chargers, they came close. They did the best that they can. They were just missing a lot of their big playmakers. Protecting the quarterback would have been nice. They're also a little less efficient in the red zone. The Bills were 2 of 3 in the red zone attempts, whereas the Chargers were 1 of 3. They didn't turn the ball over at all, so you can't fault them like that this time, like you could against the Raiders. Really speaking, I think it just comes down to the personnel. Sorry, there was a loud wheel noise. I'm on vacation right now. So I think that was someone's suitcase, but it kind of freaked me out because I thought it was coming from inside the place that I'm at. But yeah, better luck next time for the Chargers, and the Bills win a very, very necessary one to make the playoffs. So after that, we move into the Sunday slate of games, and we start off with the Colts visiting the Falcons. The Colts lost this game very badly with a final score of 10-29. I did not see this coming at all. The Colts fall to 8-7, while the Falcons rise to 7-8. In this game, you had Tyler Heineke being promoted to starting quarterback once again, and with that, he completed 23 passes for 229 yards and a touchdown. And on the other hand, you had Gardner Minshew completing 20 passes for 201 yards and 1 interception. Then rushing the ball, there was Jonathan Taylor rushing 18 times for 43 yards, which is horrible efficiency, and he did manage to score a touchdown. And on the other hand, you had Bijan Robinson carrying the ball 12 times for 72 yards, which is very efficient. So that's a big disparity there. And speaking of Bijan Robinson, he was also the leading receiver for the Falcons, catching 7 passes for 50 yards. And the Colts were playing without Michael Pittman in this game, I believe. So their leading receiver was Kyle Granson. I believe his first name is Kyle. Let's double check. Kylan Granson, my mistake. He got 5 passes for 62 yards. So, yeah, taking a look at the team stats from this game, you had the Colts accumulating 262 yards of offense, whereas the Falcons were able to get 406 yards of offense. This is very surprising to me because in my pregame analysis, I was talking about how bad the Falcons' offense is. So, it looks like they figured it out. The turnover battle wasn't that bad in this game. The Colts lost 1-0. And when I break down their offenses, you had the Colts passing for 170 yards, whereas the Falcons passed for 229, so a difference of 59 yards there. And rushing the ball is where it was really the kicker for the Colts. You had 92 yards of rushing for the Colts, but the Falcons rushed the ball for 177 yards. More rolling of wheels. Very spooky. And this game was also very funny because if you look at the red zone, the Colts made the red zone twice and they were able to score on one of these 2 trips. The Falcons somehow made the red zone 3 times and they didn't score in any of those 3 trips, but they were still able to win it. A large part of that is due to how many field goals they made in this game. They scored 5 field goals. So yeah, they didn't have to be great in the red zone. I think I recently saw that Young-Ho Koo is not pronounced Young-Ho. It's pronounced some other way, like Young-Wei Koo, which is a big surprise to me. But yeah, the guy is a beast, and so it makes sense that they scored more points through his leg than through touchdowns. And then yeah, taking a look at the sack battle, the Colts allowed Gardner Minshew to get sacked 6 times in this game, whereas the Falcons only allowed 1 sack. And as I mentioned before, 1 interception by Gardner Minshew to the 0 turnover of the Falcons. So that is what led the Falcons to a victory on Sunday. But moving on from that, after that you had the Seattle Seahawks barely defeating the Tennessee Titans with a final score of 20-17. This really came down to the wire for the Seahawks as they scored all of their touchdowns in the 4th quarter of this game. you had Geno Smith making the start in this one, completing 25 passes for 227 yards and 2 touchdowns. Across from him, you had Ryan Tannehill making the start for the Titans, 18 passes for 152 yards. Then Kenneth Walker was playing inactive for the Seahawks. He had 16 carries for 54 yards, which is okay. And across from him, you had Derrick Henry rushing 19 times for 88 yards and a touchdown. Derrick Henry also had a passing touchdown in this game. Then, receiving the ball, there was Tyler Lockett leading the way for the Seahawks receiving group with 8 catches for 81 yards, and Chigoziem Okonkwo was the leading receiver for the Titans, catching 6 passes for 63 yards and a score. Total yardage in this game was almost even for the two offenses, with the Seahawks gathering 273 yards and the Titans gathering 287. Relatively low offensive outputs, I would say. Very clean game, no turnovers at all. Taking a look at the sacks, actually, that is a key contributor to the Titans' demise. They allowed Tannehill to get sacked 6 times, whereas the Seahawks only allowed 3, so Titans allowed double the sacks there. And then passing the ball, it was 215 yards for the Seahawks and 125 for the Titans. And that is a huge difference. It's going to be hard to win games when you're only throwing for 125 yards. Rushing the ball, the Titans had way more success, almost triple the yardage, with the Seahawks getting 58 yards, whereas the Titans got 162, but that wasn't enough. Really, what did it for the Titans in this game was not the red zone attempts, because the Seahawks were 2 of 4 and the Titans were 2 of 3. So technically the Titans were better in the red zone, but part of it was the penalties. The Seahawks had 6 penalties, setting them back 47 yards, but the Titans had 10, setting them back 97, so they had over 50 yards loss. 2 penalties over the Seahawks, and so, yeah, that's really the biggest point of concern, the sacks and the penalties, because they only lost this game by 3 points. They really could have won it, but they're just gonna have to live with this loss. I don't think that winning would have done anything for them, whereas the Seahawks very badly did need to win this game, so it worked out in favor of both teams. I think that the Titans will soon look to move away from Ryan Tannehill, because the guy is he's washed. But moving on, we had after that the Detroit Lions facing off against the Minnesota Vikings. They would win this game with a final score of 30-24. The Lions got their 11th win on the season, which is the most that I've ever seen in my life, and I don't think that I've seen them get an 11-win season. I know that they made the playoffs a few years ago, but I don't think they had 11 in that year. They lock up the NFC North. They're the division leader for the first time since 30-something years. I don't know, very big achievement for the Lions. And the Vikings, they fall to 7-8 on the season. In this game, you had Jared Goff completing 30 passes for 257 yards and a touchdown, and Nick Mullins completing 22 passes for 411 yards and 2 touchdowns. But it also came with 4 interceptions, and that was critical in the Vikings' loss. Jahmyr Gibbs was the leading rusher for the Lions, carrying the ball 15 times for 80 yards and 2 touchdowns. Very productive day for him. And on the other hand, you had Ty Chandler, who had a horrible time on the ground against this very stout Lions rushing defense. He carried the ball 8 times for only 17 yards, but he did manage to score a touchdown. And in the receiving game, you had a battle between 2 very, very good wide receivers. Amon-Ra St. Brown caught 12 passes for 106 yards and a touchdown. And across from him, you had the return of Justin Jefferson, who had an amazing touchdown catch. He finished with had 6 catches for 141 yards and a touchdown. So, in terms of total yardage, it was almost exactly the same, which doesn't make sense to me because, ESPN is telling me that the Minnesota Vikings had 390 yards of offense. I guess this is minus the sack. Yeah, okay. So, they had 390 yards of offense because of all the yardage they lost to their sacks, I'm assuming. And the Lions had 389 yards of offense, so the difference in offensive production came down to 1 yard, dead even. But the Lions turned the ball over 1 time, and the Vikings turned the ball over 4 times. And that was the key difference in this game. Also, sacks. The Lions allowed 1 sack, whereas the Vikings allowed 4. So, sacks and turnovers, 2 very critical areas of the game that you're going to want to excel in if you're trying to win games, and the Vikings did not excel. So, really, that's all it came down to. But yeah, good for Lions fans, and we'll move on into the next game, which was a matchup between the New York Jets and the Washington Commanders. The Jets won this game with a final score of 30-28. I was so surprised to see how high scoring this game ended up being. New York ran away with the lead in the first half. They're winning 27-7 at halftime, and then they started choking. The Commanders scored 21 straight points in the second half, and New York was luckily able to win it with a last-second field goal, but they totally choked their lead. In this game, New York was led by Trevor Siemian, who completed 27 passes for 217 yards, a touchdown, and an interception. You also had the Commanders starting 2 quarterbacks. One was Sam Howell, and then you saw Jacoby Brissett enter the game. Brissett finished with 10 passes for 100 yards and a touchdown. He led the second half comeback for the Commanders. Rushing the ball, you had an amazing day from Breece Hall. I guess rushing and receiving, because he had 20 carries for 95 yards and 2 touchdowns, and then he also added 12 catches for 96 yards. So, immense day for Breece Hall. Rushing the ball for the Commanders, you have, what is his first name? Rodriguez. He is Chris Rodriguez Jr. He had 10 carries for 58 yards and 2 touchdowns. And then on the receiving end, you had Terry McLaurin catching 3 passes for 50 yards. So, in this game, the Commanders had 3 turnovers, whereas the Jets only had 2. In terms of offensive production, the Commanders did not have a good day. They only put up 245 total yards of offense, whereas the Jets had 381, and that's a margin of 136 yards. And that also led the Jets to possessing the ball way more in this game. The Commanders had 23 minutes and 44 seconds of offense, whereas the Jets held the ball for 36 minutes and 16 seconds. And then taking a look, more wheels. Taking a look at the offensive figures, you have the Commanders completing 143 yards through the air, whereas the Jets had 217. Then you had 102 yards on the ground for the Commanders, but 164 on the ground for the Jets, and that's a pretty big difference. Then looking at the sacks, it was a very sack-free game actually. The Commanders only allowed 1 sack, and the Jets did not allow any at all. So that was very big for them, helped them win this game. And actually, when you look at it, the Commanders had a nice red zone efficiency day. They were 4 of 4 in the red zone compared to the 2 of 5 of the Jets. But it just didn't matter because the Jets were still able to win this game. So, a effort by the Washington Commanders, but they fall short, and so they fell to 4-11 on the season, whereas the Jets improved to 6-9. After that, you have the Green Bay Packers and the Carolina Panthers finishing in a very close one. The Packers ended up winning this game 33-30. It's the Joe Barry special, taking an opposing team and making their offense look phenomenal. In this game, you have Jordan Love finishing with 17 passes for 219 yards and 2 touchdowns, and Bryce Young having a pretty nice day with 23 passes for 312 yards and 2 touchdowns. Aaron Jones had a good running day, which is kind of rare this season. He had 21 carries for 127 yards. And for the Panthers, you had Chuba Hubbard carrying the ball 16 times for 43 yards and a score. And then in the receiving game, Romeo Doubs led the Packers wide receiver group with 4 catches for 79 yards and a touchdown. And DJ Chark was the standout wide receiver for the Panthers, hauling in 6 passes for 98 yards and 2 touchdowns. So a very big day from Chark. Taking a look at the offensive production, it was pretty close. The Packers, who won this game, had 369 yards of offense, whereas the Panthers actually had more with 394. In the turnover game, it was a very clean game of football, with both teams turning the ball over 0 times. So, when it came to passing, as I mentioned, the Packers finished with 207 yards, whereas the Panthers finished with 298. Rushing the ball, the Packers had a big advantage because they finished with 162 yards rushing, whereas the Panthers only had 96. So that's a 66-yard difference there. Both teams did pretty well in the red zone, with the Packers scoring 3 of 4 and the Panthers going 3 of 3. And sacks was also pretty close, with the Packers allowing 1 sack and the Panthers allowing 2 sacks. And then looking at the penalty game, it is slightly different. You have 6 penalties for 67 yards on the Packers and 8 penalties for 87 yards on the Panthers. So really looking at this game, in offense, Carolina did better. They allowed 1 more sack and they had 2 more penalties, which is very little, and they barely lost this game. So one of Carolina's best performances on the year, and the Packers, they managed to keep their very slim playoff hopes alive. So, good game from both teams. After that, we move into the Browns and Texans game. The Browns won this game with a final score of 36-22. It was a matchup between Joe Flacco and Davis Mills and Case Keenum for the Texans. Joe Flacco had an amazing day. He completed 27 passes for 368 yards and 3 touchdowns, albeit also 2 interceptions. And Davis Mills completed 15 passes for 149 yards and 2 touchdowns. Rushing the ball, the Browns had Jerome Ford carry the ball 15 times for only 25 yards and a touchdown, whereas Devin Singletary had 9 carries for 44 yards. And receiving the ball, Amari Cooper put up one of the craziest wide receiver stat lines that you'll see. He had 11 catches for 265 yards and 2 touchdowns, whereas the Texans were led by Dalton Schultz, who had 8 catches for 61 yards. Offensively, the Browns definitely dominated in this game, putting up 418 total yards of offense to the 250 of the Texans. And then in the turnover category, both teams had 2, so it was even there. Passing the ball was the biggest difference in this game. The Browns led the Texans 364 to 178. Rushing the ball, neither team did particularly well. The Browns only gained 54 on the ground, whereas the Texans gained 72. When it came to the sacks, the Browns allowed Joe Flacco to get sacked 1 time, whereas the Texans allowed their quarterbacks to get sacked 3, which is not a huge difference. And in so many drives that it didn't matter. And yeah, the Texans also had a special teams or defensive score in this game, which helped them stay closer to in it, but they still lost by 14. So very good job by the Cleveland Browns. They are now at a record of 10-5, which is crazy considering Deshaun Watson going down for the year earlier. And they actually are one of 3 teams that still have an opportunity to finish with the 1 seed in the AFC. I also saw that this is the first time that both the Browns and the Lions are finishing with 10 or more wins since the 1956 NFL season. So, yeah, great job to both of these teams for putting together such a solid season. I'm rooting for them. Go Browns. After that, we'll move into the Jaguars and Buccaneers game. The Jaguars did not do well at all. They lost to the Buccaneers with a final score of 30-12. Jaguars fall to 8-7, whereas the Buccaneers rise to 8-7. In this game, Trevor Lawrence completed 17 passes for 211 yards, a touchdown, and 2 interceptions, whereas Baker Mayfield had yet another great day. He finished 26 passes for 283 yards and 2 touchdowns. Trevor Lawrence was actually the leading rusher for the Jaguars, rushing the ball 4 times for 29 yards. And for the Buccaneers, they did not have a very efficient day on the ground, with Rachaad White getting 20 carries, but only amassing 39 yards and getting a score. Evan Ingram was the leading receiver for the Jaguars, catching 10 passes for 95 yards. And on the other hand, you had Mike Evans, the stud, catching 7 passes for 86 yards and 2 touchdowns. In this game, the Tampa Bay offense barely beat the Jaguars offense, getting 335 to the Jaguars' 305 total yards. But the turnovers were detrimental for the Jaguars. They turned the ball over 4 times in this game, 2 interceptions and 2 fumbles. So that's really where the game was thrown away for them. They also allowed Trevor Lawrence to get sacked 4 times, whereas Baker Mayfield was only sacked twice. And yeah, as I said before, the total yardage wasn't that different. Passing was almost dead even, with Lawrence throwing for 268 yards, whereas Baker threw for 265. Rushing the ball is not even that different either. Both teams struggled, with the Jaguars really struggling, getting only 37 yards on the ground, but the Buccaneers also only getting 70. So really it came down to the sloppiness of the Jaguars, costing them this game. They ended 4 of their own drives. So yeah, both teams had 2 successful red zone trips, with the Jaguars going 2 of 3 and the Buccaneers going 2 of 5, which is not great, but they didn't even need it. So the Jaguars have now lost 4 straight games. Very concerning if you are a Jaguars fan, but hopefully they are able to turn it around and still retain possession of the AFC South. And the Buccaneers, on the other hand, huge underdogs. I don't think anyone expected them to win this division. I know I saw talks of the Saints, like I had the Saints winning it easily. I saw talks of the Falcons being able to do it because of their easy schedule. I saw some people saying that the Panthers had a great offseason, they would be able to do it. But I don't think anyone predicted that the Buccaneers would be winning this division. So hats off to them. They are proving a lot of people wrong this year. After that, you have the Cardinals going to Chicago to play against the Bears. The Bears defeated the Cardinals in this game with a final score of 27-16. Justin Fields had an alright day. He had 15 passes for 170 yards and a touchdown, but also an interception. Kyler Murray also had a solid day, completing 24 passes for 230 yards and 2 scores. James Conner had a nice day all around. He carried the ball 12 times for 45 yards, but also caught 5 passes for 67 yards and a touchdown. For the Bears, Khalil Herbert was their leading rusher, having a nice day with 112 yards and a touchdown, and Cole Kmet was the leading pass catcher for the Bears with four catches for 170 yards. The Bears led this game in offensive production by 114 yards. They finished with 420, whereas the Cardinals finished with only 306. The Bears actually lost the turnover battle in this game, having 1 turnover to the 0 of the Cardinals. But really it came down to the rushing attack of the Bears. Even though the Cardinals were able to outpass the Bears 213 to 170, the Cardinals gained 93 yards on the ground, whereas the Bears gained 250 yards. So they were actually better rushing than passing, which doesn't happen all that often unless it's a snow game or something. But yeah, 250 yards on the ground. They really ate up the clock. The Bears finished with 34 minutes and 32 seconds in time of possession. And yeah, even though they had more penalties, actually that doesn't really matter. I don't know why I read that. Yeah, they had more turnovers, they had more penalties, but they were just able to run the ball however they liked. The Bears were 3 and 5 in the red zone, and the Cardinals barely got to the red zone at all. They finished 1 of 1. So, yeah, the Bears were just able to run however they felt like in this game. Moving on from that, you had the Cowboys and Dolphins facing off. Very big matchup, a lot at stake for both teams. The Dolphins got the best of the Cowboys in this game, winning with a last-second field goal and finishing with a final score of 22 to 20. In this game, you had Dak Prescott playing relatively well. He had 20 passes for 253 yards and 2 touchdowns, and Tua also played relatively well. 24 passes for 293 yards and a touchdown. For the Cowboys, you had Tony Pollard as the leading rusher with 12 carries for 38 yards, which is okay, and Raheem Mostert leading for the Dolphins with 11 carries for 46 yards. Then receiving the ball, you had 2 pretty nice days from the lead wide receivers. CeeDee Lamb finished with 6 catches for 118 yards and a score, whereas Tyreek Hill had 9 catches for 99 yards. In this game, you'll find that the Cowboys were outgained by Miami, not by that much, only 36 yards. Dallas finished with 339 yards of offense, and Miami finished with 375. But Dallas had a turnover. It was a very crucial lost fumble, I think near the end zone. Tony Pollard was unable to score at the goal line basically, and Dallas would turn the ball over and walk away with no points on that trip, and they lost the game by 2. So that drive was really the difference between winning and losing for the Cowboys. I don't even think more needs to be said about why they lost the game. They lost it because of that alone. So, tough break for Cowboys fans. They moved back in their NFC East positions because of this game. And the Dolphins, they are... they're rolling. Great game from them. They beat the Allegations. They finally beat a team above 500. So, good day for the Dolphins. Now, finally, the moment I've been waiting for, we get to talk about the Patriots and Broncos game on Sunday Night Football. This game took place on Christmas Eve. I had the pleasure of attending this game. I was talking up a storm about it in my predictions video, talking about how in games I have gone to, the Patriots have never lost, which was only 2 games, by the way. But I went to my 3rd game, and guess what happened, guys? The Patriots won yet again. This was a great game. Started off horrible for the Patriots. First play of the game, Bailey Zappi, he receives the ball, he receives the hike, gets absolutely destroyed by a sack, and the Broncos force fumble and take over the ball at the 5-yard line. And side of the field where it all happened. So I could see him get absolutely demolished and the Browns take over. And at that point, me and my stepmom just looked at each other and were like, wow. The whole stadium was up in cheers, and we were just laughing because it was kind of representative of our season. But the Patriots defense is unbelievably nice at times. The Broncos from the 5-yard line went for it on 4th down. They couldn't get it in the first 3 attempts, and they went for it, and they still failed. So they walked away with no points at all. Patriots offense, they didn't do very much in the first half. They had 1 field goal, and I believe they missed another field goal that was very easy. The Broncos, on the other hand, they also struggled. It felt like they were dominating a little bit because of how well they were handling our offense, but their offense was also very bad. So they only led 7-3 at halftime. Then, in the 3rd quarter, the Patriots went nuts. Started off with a good drive, capped with a Ezekiel Elliott touchdown pass from Bailey Zappi. Then, Broncos got the ball, couldn't really do anything. Patriots got the ball again. They managed to somehow score another touchdown, which was pretty crazy. Like, I really didn't think we were going to get it, but a touchdown pass to Mike Gesicki. And, yeah, that put the Patriots up, what was it, 14 plus 3, 17-7. And, no, actually, after the Ezekiel Elliott touchdown, we missed the extra point, so we missed a kick earlier in the game, field goal, and then we missed an extra point, so we're leading 9-7, and then we led 16-7. Then, as we kicked the ball off back to the Broncos, whoever was receiving, he muffed the kickoff, and immediately the Patriots got it and ran into the end zone, or like dove into the end zone, because it happened just like 4 yards out of the end zone. And wait, no, I'm remembering that wrong, my bad. I think he might have muffed it. He picked it up, he ran a little bit, and then it was poked out by a Patriots player, and another Patriot was able to grab it and dive into the end zone. So just like that, in back-to-back plays, the Patriots scored touchdowns, went up 23-7, and the life was sucked out of the Broncos stadium. It was amazing. At no point during that game did I think that was going to be a score that occurred. All the Broncos fans in the section around us, they cleared out. It was really, really cold. Like, this game was sub-20s. So a bunch of people left at halftime just because it was so cold. And then definitely at the end of the 3rd quarter, most people around us were gone. But the Broncos came storming back. They scored a touchdown and completed a 2-point conversion, and then they did it again. So they scored 16 unanswered points in the 4th quarter, tied up the game. And then with 2 minutes and like 40 seconds left, they gave the Patriots the ball. Patriots did absolutely nothing and just gave the ball right back to the Broncos. It felt really dim at that point because the Patriots only had 1 timeout. It was looking very bleak, but the defense stood tall and made the Broncos punt it. So they punted to the Patriots with like 50 seconds left in the game, and there was a lot of ground to cover. So at this point, everyone was really expecting overtime. I don't think anyone thought that the Patriots were going to really go down the field and kick a field goal, because the kicker is ass, Chad Ryland. Until that point, huge disappointment. Already missed like a 30-yard kick, missed an extra point. There's no faith in him, at least from the fan base. But this guy, we go down the field with 7 seconds left in the game. We decide to call the timeout, and we set up for a 56-yard field goal. And I was like, I'll be damned if we make this kick. And sure enough, the guy makes it, and we go crazy. There's not a single... I couldn't believe what I had seen, a 56-yarder to win the game. Like, well, there's 2 seconds left, win it, but like effectively we won the game because the Broncos just failed on a Hail Mary attempt, and it was such a Christmas delight. It was so nice. So yeah, very, very nice Patriots victory. I really enjoyed it. Moving into the stats part of it, Bailey Zapp finished with 25 completions for 256 yards and 2 touchdowns. Russell Wilson had 25 completions for 238 yards and 2 touchdowns. So, almost identical stat lines for the Patriots. They didn't rush the ball very well, even though the Broncos' rush defense is really their biggest weakness. They played the rush well. Ezekiel Elliott had 12 carries for only 27 yards, whereas Jaleel McLaughlin had 6 carries for 37 yards for the Broncos. And in the receiving game, Demario Douglas had 5 catches for 74 yards, and Marvin Mims Jr. was the leading receiver for the Broncos with 3 catches for 63 yards. New England barely outgained the Broncos in this game, finishing with 289 total yards to the 276 of the Broncos. New England only had 1 turnover in this game, whereas the Broncos had 2. And then, New England scored on special teams, as I mentioned. When it comes to red zone efficiency, both teams were the exact same. They were 2 of 3 on the red zone attempts. Neither team rushed the ball all that well. New England had 59 yards on the ground to the 83 of the Broncos. But sacks were pretty key for the Patriots. They only allowed 2 sacks, whereas the Broncos allowed 5. So, an extra turnover, 3 more sacks. And, that was enough to do the Broncos in. So the Broncos fall to 7-8, and they can pretty much kiss their playoff hopes goodbye. But the Broncos fan base is very nice. They were all very, very nice. They took the L with a lot of humility. And I have to say, Patriots fans are pretty obnoxious. There are a lot of people parading and showboating after the game. I don't really stand for that. There's no reason to be doing all of that. Broncos fans were nothing but nice the entire game, so wasn't a huge fan of the way that the Patriots fans in the stadium or walking out of the stadium were taunting, but I can understand their excitement after such a lousy season. But yeah, moving on to the Christmas Day slate. First in the morning, you had the Raiders visiting the Chiefs. This was an unbelievable game. I have to hand it to the Raiders. I really didn't think it was possible for them to win this game. Just them being away and the Chiefs, it being the Chiefs. I didn't have faith. But against all odds, the Raiders pulled this off. Aiden O'Connell did not complete another pass after the first quarter. With 2 minutes left in the first quarter, he did not complete another pass. And the Raiders won this game 20 to 14. It was purely their defense. Their defense carried in this matchup. Las Vegas led 3-0 after the first quarter. Then they led 17-7 at halftime. Then they led 20-7 after 3 quarters. And it was just too big of a gap for the Chiefs to make up. Aiden O'Connell, as I said, he finished 9. He only completed 9 passes for 62 yards, whereas Mahomes completed 27 passes for 235 yards, 1 touchdown, and 1 interception. That 1 interception was actually a pick 6 to Jack Jones. The Chiefs had a fumble that was recovered for a touchdown, and they had a pick 6 in back-to-back plays. So a horrible sequence of events for them. And the Raiders, they were really able to keep their lead behind the rushing attack. Zamir White finished with 22 carries for 145 yards in this game, and Mahomes was the leading rusher for the Chiefs with 10 carries for 53 yards. And then receiving the ball, Jacoby Myers led the Raiders with 3 catches catches for 42 yards, and Rashee Rice led the Chiefs with 6 catches for 57 yards. So, as I said, the Chiefs won in the offensive battle. They weren't good on offense, but they had over 100 yards more of offense, 308 to the 205 of the Raiders. But the Chiefs turned the ball over 2 times, with both of those turnovers turning into direct points for the Raiders. And so that was just too much for them to overcome. The Chiefs really have not been that great this year. They fall to 9-6 on the year, which is their worst season in a while. They lose their ability to finish number 1 overall in the AFC, so that means they will have to potentially play a road playoff game this offseason, which they've never done. They've never had an AFC game on the road before, so we'll see how they finish out these last 2 weeks. But truly inspirational victory from the Raiders, and just back-to-back weeks of proving the doubters wrong. I cannot believe it. Great stuff from Las Vegas. After that, you had the Giants facing off against the Eagles. The Eagles won this game at a final margin of 33-25. Big second half effort from the Giants. They were losing 20-3 at halftime, but then they scored 22 in the last 2 quarters, which is a good second half effort. In this game, Tyrod Taylor was the leading passer for the Giants. Tommy Cutlets, I think, was benched. Tyrod Taylor finished with 7 passes for 133 yards, a touchdown, and a pick. Jalen Hurts had 24 passes for 301 yards, a touchdown, and a pick. Rushing the ball, Saquon had 23 carries for 80 yards and a touchdown, whereas DeAndre Swift had 20 carries for 92 yards and a touchdown. DeAndre Slayton had 3 catches for 90 yards and a touchdown, and A.J. Brown had 6 catches for 80 yards. In terms of total offense, Philly absolutely destroyed here. They had 465, whereas New York had 292, so that's a lot more. Even though Philly had 2 turnovers to the 1 of the Giants, they were just much better on offense than the Giants were. The Giants actually were able to score a defensive special team touchdown in this game, which helped make the margin not as bad. But 170 yards on the ground for the Eagles versus 106 for the Giants. 295 through the air for the Eagles versus 186 for the Giants. So offensively, the Giants just could not keep up in this game. Both teams only allowed 1 sack, so that wasn't an issue. It's just offensive efficiency. And then, in the red zone, the Giants, they got it done the one time that they went 1 of 1, but the Eagles went 2 of 5, which is a bit concerning. And the Eagles actually had a lot of penalties. They had 9 penalties for 65 yards lost. So the Eagles, they break their losing streak, but they don't play their best football. I think that they can do better. So after that, we move into the very last game. This was a very highly anticipated matchup between the Baltimore Ravens and the San Francisco 49ers. Both teams were tied for the best record in the league at 11-3. So the winner of this was going to determine quite a bit in people's minds. And it did. The Ravens handily beat the Niners in this game. 33-19 was the final score. Lamar Jackson had a nice day. He completed 23 passes for 252 yards and 2 touchdowns. And Brock Purdy, horrible game. One to forget. He has fumbled away any talks of MVP. I personally did not think that he was... Obviously, he had the stats for an MVP quarterback, but it was kind of like a product of who he's playing around, because the Niners are like a super team. I personally think that CMC is a better option for the MVP than him going into this game. But Purdy, 4 interception game, horrible. He got benched for Sam Darnold. Then you Jackson finishing as the lead rusher for the Ravens with 7 carries for 45 yards. Christian McCaffrey he did his part. He had 14 carries for 103 yards and a touchdown. And then in the receiving game, Zay Flowers had 9 catches for 72 yards and a touchdown. George Kittle had 7 catches for 126 yards. In this game, Baltimore didn't have as much offense. They had 343 yards of offense to the 429 of the 49ers. But the turnovers just kept piling up. San Francisco turned the ball over 5 times in this game, which shows that the Ravens defense is nothing to mess with. San Francisco also had 10 penalties for 102 yards in this one. Both teams were 50% from the red zone. 3-6 for the Ravens, 2-4 for the 49ers. The Niners also allowed more sacks, 4 to the 2 of the Ravens. And so yeah, just uncharacteristically high mistake game for the 49ers. They really struggled in this one. And the Ravens, they have really shifted the narrative in every regard. I feel like most people had the Niners winning this game. I had the Niners winning this game, and now with the Ravens winning it, we have to have a serious conversation about them being the best team in football. They have the best record. They're number 1 in the AFC. They took down the team that everyone thought was the best, and they took them down bad. Brock Purdy and Christian McCaffrey, 2 leading MVP candidates on this 49er team. The narrative has shifted to Lamar Jackson, and I know a lot of people are saying that Lamar doesn't really have that wowing of stats, but looking at what he has done this year, in the last few seasons when Lamar has gone down, the Ravens have kind of struggled, and a few years ago when Lamar played the whole season, he won MVP, he had a great season. And yes, maybe Lamar's stats are down, but think about who he is producing with, like Brock Purdy and Christian McCaffrey. Yes, absolute studs. I'm not trying to detract from their season, but you've got like an all-star lineup at O-line for San Francisco. You have George Kittle, you have Deebo Samuel, you have Brandon Ayuk. You have all these really, really great guys on the offensive side of the ball. And they all feed off of one another. They're all good as a group, so it makes sense that they're successful. Who is Lamar playing with, really? The Baltimore Ravens are 12-3. Their best offensive threat, Mark Andrews, went down with a season-ending injury way long ago. Then J.K. Dobbins, their number 1 rusher, their number 1 running back going into the season, also season-ending knee injury very early into the season. And yet Lamar has led this team to 12-3, obviously with the help of the defense. But look at the receiving core. You've got Zay Flowers, a rookie, Rashad Bateman, 3rd-year wide receiver, who has not really lived up to his potential. We've got Nelson Aguilar and a pretty washed Odell Beckham Jr. Is this team without Lamar Jackson really that scary? No. Gosh, no. I think just looking at their offense on paper and looking at their record, and then I don't know. I feel like Lamar being MVP after this game, after beating the best team, and seeing how many playoff and winning teams the Ravens have beat this year by 14 points, it's gotta be his. If it's not him, it's Samzy or it's Tyreek. Those are the only other 2 guys I'm willing to consider. But this has kind of changed perspective for me. I think that Lamar is very deserving of it. If they give it to him, I would not be mad. If they give it to Christian McCaffrey, I would not be mad either. The guy has been balling out. And if they give it to Tyreek, depending on the next 2 weeks, I wouldn't be mad either. All 3 of these guys, I think, are deserving of the MVP award. I know that there's a lot of criticism that MVP is a quarterback-only award, and I do kind of agree with that. So I would like to see a non-quarterback win it, if Tyreek or CMC could win it, I'm not upset at all. But under no circumstances do I think any quarterback should get it if it's not Lamar. He is definitely the only quarterback deserving of it, in my opinion. But yeah, that concludes this video. Thank you for watching. If you enjoy content like this, feel free to like, comment, or subscribe for more. I'll see if I can make more videos as this week progresses. It's kind of tough. I'm not at home at the moment, so I'll see if free time is easy to come by. But you'll see it if I post. So yeah, thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.